it's interesting, but Kant, the next guy up, does not want to revert back to the skepticism where we throw up our hands in despair and say, there's too many competing ideas. We're like philosophically paralyzed. It's like a checkmate. We can't move. Enter Immanuel Kant, whose name means God with us, right? Immanuel Kant. And I'm going to leave these two up. But Immanuel Kant, he's living in the 18th century. He's writing about the time of the American Revolutionary War, like the 1770s, etc. And when he was reading, I believe he was reading Copernicus, and also David Hume, the Scottish philosopher, the skeptic, he said, I awoke from my dogmatic slumber, because he was caught in this like Aristotelian either or, like one of these guys has to be right. But just like realizing there's a moon going around Jupiter, he begins to think, is it possible that there could be a real external world, but we really are the ones bringing it into reality, at least in our own minds? And so he starts to think in this both and sort of reasoning. And part of his both and reasoning, he doesn't want it to be this either or, but he doesn't want to become this Spinozian pantheist either. And so what he does, he talks about a distinction between phenomena and noumena. Anyone want to tell me what either of those words mean? Phenomena is that which you can perceive. So anything with your senses or even your thoughts, that is the phenomenal world, the world of experience. Noumena are things as they actually are. And this is what Kant wants to point out. He says, it's like we're wearing glasses or goggles. If you think the world you see is the world as it is, Kant would call you a naive realist. He says, what's actually happening is much more like that video I just showed you, is there is a world out there, but it passes through you and you order it to what makes sense to a human being. If I was lecturing a classroom full of pit vipers right now, you would all have little heat sensors on the sides of your faces, and you would be picking up my heat signature. And you would be able to distinguish my heat signature from every other heat signature in the room. And your brain would be translating that heat signature into images that you could understand and that would help you survive or find food, whatnot. If this was a classroom full of bats, you would all be chirping at me, picking up sonar images that your brain would be interpreting as this bearded hermit gnome standing before you. But because you're humans and you're not vipers or bats, you're mostly using your eyes and then your ears. That's mostly how you guys are picking up this information. But the same thing, you're taking it into your brain, and your brain is converting it into electrical impulse, and that is being interpreted into tones, pitch, smells, sound, all this sorts of thing is going on. And so Kant does something really novel in the Western world at this point, and he says it's not either or, it's not Locke or Berkeley, but it's both and. They're both right. But this is also why Kant is the last of the modern philosophers, because with this type of thinking, it opens the doorway to postmodernism. Because now it's not this black and white, either or this or that. You're beginning to look at how do these two things work together into a whole. But that's a much more Eastern, inclusive way of thinking, where Western philosophy has been very discriminatory, exclusive. We're trying to see in the West how things are different or unique. In the East, philosophy tends to look at how are things interconnected, how do they work together. And so you're going to see this play out big time in the second part of the class. But Kant is about as Western a philosopher as you can get. He is the most rational, logical, empirical sort of guy, but he understands humans are limited. We're only seeing a little piece of the picture. And with intellectual, philosophical humility, we need to acknowledge that we are simply seeing the world as it appears to us. But if we start making truth claims that that's the actual world, he would say, stop being ignorant. Think about the color spectrum or the light spectrum. It's huge. But humans have like mid-range vision. But we know because of other tools and lenses that there's ultraviolet and infrared and beyond, right? But those are like just outside of our vision spectrums. But there's other creatures amongst us that have infrared vision, like the pit vipers, or ultraviolet vision, like many insects. I used to show this video in here called The Invisible Universe, and it would put different filters on cameras so you could see what you normally couldn't see with the naked human eye. And the one that has stuck with me all these years, they showed this field of white wildflowers. And they were pretty, but just very plain white flowers. But when they put the ultraviolet lens on the camera, these white flowers, all of a sudden, the center became just this black, almost like target. And then on the petals were almost like landing strips pointing to where the nectar was, or the pollen. Okay, the arrows are my addition. But besides that, it's just, you're just going, what? And you're beginning to realize this world isn't really just about us. We are in this world, we have our place, we have a role, but it's just this little tiny piece. There's so much more out there beyond what we can see or perceive. And that's part of the beauty of science. As we get better microscopes, better telescopes, different things of looking at the world in a macro or micro way, it expands our understanding and awareness. But even with the best tools, we have to acknowledge the fact we're limited in what we can perceive and what we can know. But Berkeley is also correct in that we are the ones who order the world in which we live. We are the ones that are making these values, these judgments, these tastes, these smells. This is part of this subjective personal interaction. And so Kant is saying both and, embrace both, because that is the fundamental nature of reality. Okay, questions, comments?